So, a while back, I made a video about qualia, and I thought I'd make another video focusing on similar concepts. But this time, I thought I would cover a topic that might be slightly more interesting for folks who otherwise aren't very interested in philosophy. That's why I want to talk about zombies and swampmen. But before beginning the discussion proper, I do want to ask a quick question. What is your mind? Is it something physical, or does it exist elsewhere, apart from your body? Now, some of you might think, well, that's just absurd. My mind is my brain. It's not separate from me. But is it? Certainly there is a connection between our brains and our minds. I mean, there are clear examples with the numerous cases of cognitive disorders, neurological ailments, and severe head trauma. Best example, Phineas Gage, a railroad worker who went from a hard-working and responsible young man to an impulsive, dishonest, and quick-tempered degenerate after a railroad spike was shot up through his skull and destroyed his frontal lobe. Except those changes didn't actually happen, or rather they were heavily exaggerated. After recovering from his injuries, Gage found work in Chile as a coach driver, a job which required him to follow a fixed schedule and interact with passengers in an appropriate manner. True, he experienced brain damage, and said damage altered his behavior some, but after rehabilitation he made a reasonable recovery and was relatively unaffected by the accident, at least mentally speaking. Now, I don't mean to imply that the brain has no influence over our minds, but it's clear that various portions of the brain don't affect our personalities. Thus, we come to the debate between dualism and physicalism. Even though these discussions tend to involve physicalism and idealism, both of which conflict with dualism, and even then there are different types of dualism, listen, philosophy is really complex, but right now we're going to focus on property dualism and physicalism, mainly because these concepts are relevant to the video. Now, property dualism is the belief that although we live in a world of physical substance, there are physical and non-physical properties to said substances. And these non-physical properties, or mental properties, such as our beliefs, desires, and emotions, they're all inherent to various physical substances, such as our brains. On the other hand, physicalism is the belief that all things that we experience in reality are the result of pure physical substance, including consciousness. So those beliefs, desires, and emotions that you have and experience, just the result of neurons firing in your brain. Nothing more. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what brings us to the discussion of zombies and swampmen. We'll start with the zombies first because, well, who doesn't love zombies? Now, philosophical zombies differ from our traditional view of zombies, where we're not referring to rotting corpses that have come back from the dead and consume human flesh. No, these are creatures that look and behave exactly like normal human beings. In fact, the two are almost completely indistinguishable from one another. So what is the difference between a human and a zombie? Well, where a human being is a sentient creature that can have conscious experiences, the zombie possesses none of these qualities. It can mimic the functions of a human being, it can act as if it were having experiences and respond to various stimuli in a manner that we would deem appropriate, but it would only imitate these functions associated with sentience, while its own mind would be completely blank. They lack the subjective components of sensory perceptions that we typically associate with conscious experiences. Let's say you took one of these zombies and poked it with a sharp stick. Although it might respond by recoiling from the stimulus and expressing that it feels pain, in reality it wouldn't feel anything at all. It'd be kind of like having a machine that's programmed to give certain responses depending on what button you pressed. It's just going through the motions, acting within the parameters of its programming. Now, the notion of zombies within philosophy was intended to support the dualistic view of the mind, while presenting hypothetical shortcomings with physicalism. The argument is as follows. First, according to physicalism, everything that exists within our world is physical, and this includes consciousness. Secondly, if physicalism is true, then a metaphysical world in which all physical facts are the same as those of our actual world must contain everything that exists in our actual world, including conscious experience. Third, because we can conceive of a world indistinguishable from our own, but in which there is no consciousness, the world in which zombies exist, then it follows that such a world is metaphysically possible. Therefore, physicalism is false. This argument is born from the use of propositional logic, or modus talendo talens, the way that denies by denying, which is an awareness of the general truth that if a given statement is true, then so is its opposite. An example often given is as such, all dogs are mammals. If something is a dog, then it is also a mammal. Thus, if something isn't a mammal, it cannot be a dog. Now, because we are conscious beings, we must exist in a world where consciousness is possible. So, if a world in which beings identical to ourselves, with the sole difference being that these beings lack consciousness, then we could not possibly exist in such a world. Now, there have been debates as to whether this argument is logically valid, but regardless of the consensus of said debates, I don't agree with the conclusion that the argument comes to. After all, just because philosophical zombies might be a logical possibility, it doesn't necessarily follow that they would be a metaphysical reality. Even though you can conceive of a reality where zombies exist, it doesn't follow that such a world must exist, only that it can. After all, I can conceive of a world under physicalism that is indistinguishable from our own, in which there is consciousness. That doesn't necessarily mean that such a world is the same world we exist in, just that it's possible. But I don't want to delve too deep into this subject. Plenty of actual philosophers who better understand the concept have discussed the validity or lack thereof regarding the argument. And besides, we still have another thought experiment to look into: the Swampmen. The thought experiment was devised by Donald Davidson and provides a rather interesting assessment on human subjectivity and consciousness. The thought experiment is as follows. A man is traversing through a swamp when he is suddenly struck by lightning and killed. At the exact same moment, another lightning strike occurs elsewhere within the swamp and rearranges a number of molecules to construct an identical copy of the man right before he died. A swamp man. Now, physically, these two beings are indistinguishable from one another. They look the same, sound the same, have identical molecular structures, even seem to share the same memories. If you asked either individual for their name, each would give the same response. Now, this thought experiment poses some rather interesting questions regarding consciousness. Are these two beings the same person? Do they possess the same consciousness, or do they have different consciousnesses? Now, if they each have a separate consciousness, then physicalism is supported, as we have two beings with two separate minds. But if they have connected consciousness, that supports property dualism, as although we have two individuals, they share the same mind. Now, Davidson was a supporter of physicalism, and he argued that we could answer these questions simply by analyzing these beings' histories. Now, the Swamp Man just came into existence. Because of this, although the Swamp Man will appear to recognize people and objects from the previous man's life, it should be impossible for him to actually recognize them, as he's never seen them before. It shouldn't be able to recognize anything, as it lacks causal history. I mean, this is a being that wasn't just born yesterday, but a mere 15 seconds ago. Thus, the two beings could not possibly share a consciousness. Now, there is some disagreement as to the validity of Davidson's argument, but I want to know what you think. Please leave your comments down below, and let me know if you've enjoyed the video.